to be able to visualize what, or not even visualize, tactualize. That's a new word, write it down. Tactualize, right? What does that mean?
Understand like the tactility and the feeling of it.
Yeah, same as visualize, if you're doing it with your hands. And the most important thing to tactualize is to not touch with one hand, but to touch with two hands, right? So if you have a skull, and you're holding it like this, you got to use two hands. If you don't use two hands, it's all sculpture, it's all like contours. But if you use two hands, it's architecture, it's plans, right? And then you can do it blindfolded with two hands, you see? You can go like this, you can say, the two sockets here, there's a brow. So the most important thing when you're looking at something like that, if you've ever held one, and it doesn't matter if you held that particular bird in your hands, you're taking information that's all spatial dynamics. So that's what happens. You start drawing and you don't think like a spatial dynamicist. You just start drawing and you use your eyes. And that's a very reductive way of being aware of what you see in the world, right? It's very weak as opposed to spatial dynamics, right? So if you have something like that, one of the first things you do is you can visualize that from above. Let's say that's going to look something like that, right? So you have to visualize it like the letters in terms of the plans. And so from above, and then from the side, you can say now from the side, it's going to look something like that, right? So you do the plan view of it. And you try to do it not like this, right? That's the weak plan view. You try to do it more comprehensively, so you see it as the two shapes that overlap, and they start to give you more information in terms of all that, right? The only thing that you didn't have is you didn't have the middle cut on your drawing. So if you had the middle cut, you would have seen that this is an oval, and this was half an oval, and then you had convex, you had those contours that you had there on the beak. Remember what you had, right? So it means that when you were drawing the beak, it's just like drawing the letter A, and you were drawing half the letter. If you're drawing the complete letter, you come up and you say that there's this here. And when I start to draw those contours, I can bring them around and I know where the back of the beak is, right? And then you can come up here and say, maybe this one gets wider. Maybe it gets really skinny here and it starts to drop this way. It's like the wave, right? And maybe you have a little bit of a value, maybe more value here because then it's making a shadow. And then you get concave, convex, but you have the middle. And so if you have that middle, you can push it back. Whereas if you looked at it from above, you can see that it has great big eyes, and they're probably also at an angle. Now I don't have enough room, but if I have that, then I would say that I can get the other part of this cylinder, so it's just like a tube going from left to right, but then I can use the top here to make a triangle. So when I make the opening of this eye, I'm doing it lower, then when I make this one, I can do it here, like an Asher's drawing, where you did that, but you couldn't quite plot it all the way, right? So there's going to be an eye here. If it sticks out, then you can have that sort of thing, and then you have like an eyebrow, a big brow here, like back, and one that goes back, and maybe you do it angularly first, so it does this to this, and then it starts to come to here, and then you look at it at the back over there, and then you have the eye under it, which is part of the cylinder to this side, and then you have it down to the middle, and then you have the whole base of that bird skull, right? So from the whole base, then you have the front of it again. You can bring it to here, but then you can find the middle. You say there's a shape here, there's a shape there. So you did over there, you're looking at it from the front, right? You're just speculating, right? And so you have then here, like you have that great contour, and you have it bigger here, and the contour keeps coming in. But then you're more likely to be able to make it work with the other side because you're just drawing a sequence of shapes that go back like that, but you always know where the middle is, right? So just that idea of sort of planning it out and imagining what this must be like three-dimensionally. And then one of the things, so the beak really goes back and then flanges out and then curves a little bit. It goes like this, but then there's another section to the beak, which is where the front end of the beak goes back and meets over there eventually. So if you have that, right, and then you bring it down a little bit, if you have you can imagine there's an opening back there, and then you can bring that section down, then you're able to perhaps even bring the beak down and sort of open it up, if you will, but you're still thinking, when it opens, this will meet that. So it's like you're drawing a canoe, right, in terms of that. So you just keep breaking it down that way. And all of this stuff is very architectonic, you see what I mean, right? It's mostly straight lines. It's relatively simple, and then you have this section that sticks out from the back. I would imagine, also from looking at other creatures in the back, there's always a shape there, it's or rectangular and circular at the back. Like if you ever had a cow with horns, that might be what it looks like at the back, right? So your contours would look something perhaps like that, see? And then it might even be a little bit narrower over here. So if you can visualize that, then when you have the midline and you're pushing it back, and you get over to here, let's say this was fairly rounded, the back of it, or let's say it had a triangle built into it. So when I push this back, I can make it hook up with the triangle, right? And I can feel this, I can feel that. I might even be able to do some of the things that we did with the cylinders. Then you can move the center line back. We'll meet back there over here. So it comes down to here, and then this will be the opening of the cranium, right? Maybe it has two bones over here, and then you have some of the bony forms over here. Or you might even have, it's smaller on the bird, but you might even have something that comes out here this way, cheekbone, right? Which comes out of the front of the muscle of the head, and then it goes back and then it attaches over there. All of these have like cheekbones. You see on the bottom of the orbit of the eye, the cheekbone makes the orbit of the eye at the bottom. Visualizing that you can see the middle all the way to the back, and you can follow the middle at the back to the top, and then you can see the outside footprint. You see what I mean? You can also see it over here, if you will, right? And then you can see this, which is also triangular, before you start complicating it, so it becomes like now you're doing like a different letter A, but the same way. And then you come over here, where you can see that is a triangle, and maybe you volumize it a little bit, so it becomes more circular, right? But that makes a triangle, so you're back like over here, or you're also over here, where it attaches to this, and then this comes forward, it gets wider. Although in this case, I'm making it get narrower. Maybe it gets wider at the top of the beak of the nose. You see what I mean? And then you have this pattern back here. Maybe there is a cheekbone that comes out at an angle. It's not straight back like I did it, but we'll just keep that. And it finishes over here, and then you get over here, and then you can make, it's not literally the one that's there, I'm just making it up. It's like a keyhole, right? You invent a back for the back of the skull. So you have something concrete to get back to. And then like, you know, you have sort of circular line of the nose, right? Again, you have the lip pushing back. It goes back and gets even wider, if you want to emphasize that in terms of how it goes. And again, you have the brow, and then you've got the cheekbone here is making the under part of the orbit of the eye. It goes all the way out to there. And then this comes in over here, and it goes up and in, sort of it meets the semi-cylindrical or oval shape, where you're going to have the things, brain and nasal cavities and things like that, in terms of all of that. But again, this whole thing from above, you see, it would be bottom beak, distance to the back, big oval, triangle, position of the eyes, their individual axes, and then you could do them this way, right, or you could do them that way, in terms of that. Brain case, so sort of thinking about the blueprint of the skull, right? So let's try another skull. Not this one, that's a hippo, it's really complicated. Maybe, and pick one that you think of nothing. If you don't see it that way, then you're stuck having to replicate all those contours on one side and then the other, right? So it's a compound shape, but it's made out of really simple shapes, right? And if you do that, it's much easier to duplicate it, right? You see what I mean? Right? So you have to think about that. So anyhow, once we're coming up on this section here, then this is going to come out. Eventually, one of the cool parts, a lot of skulls will do that. It's like the letters, you see, when you rotate the corner, right? You're going to have these nice little teeth here. Eventually, we'll meet up with the teeth over here, and this is drawing a wave, right? This section here, it's like drawing this thing when we drew it, right? You have to pick the place where the spring is, and then maybe the spring is different. It sort of comes across over to here, but then it just gets a little wider, so you bring this across. Right? And you have teeth, so teeth meet teeth. So if you have these, then you're going to have a section here where you draw something similar. This is sort of like a lunchbox, where this comes back and then it comes down, where you have teeth and it goes up, and it's going to come up until you meet something at the back corner, where you have, here we're just going to treat it as just as a circular form, where, and the basic shape of the phone here might just be like that, right? It's kind of like Asher's drawing before, really clean, long, very nice horse head. The only thing that happens is that you don't have a corner, and you need that corner, right? But that corner eventually here will be, You have a cylinder, it goes all the way back to there, right? You have the eyes crisscrossing, and let's say it's not too much, or maybe we get this angle a little bit so we can find an eye here, we can find an eye over there, right? But then we can see, same thing as with this, that the contour there is really just a byproduct of like having a sense of the compound shape as being a number of simpler shapes. And just in the angle that you see them. And then you have a little bit of this one. And well, if we don't have the width of this, which is wider, like you see from above here, it's like a lunchbox, this section, except we're separating them. You see, it goes back to here. When it comes up to here, then it goes back and it becomes almost like the handle of a pistol, right? Or of a hairdryer, right? But then here you have this section. This is the most important part of drawing a skull, or the least important part at the beginning that you do this only last, right? That you find the section here on the maxilla, which is the upper part of the mandible, because together they masticate, right? They chew your food, right? And here it's open, right? So it's like, you might see a little opening there, but you got teeth, and the key place is the front teeth where they meet and the back teeth where they meet, right? So those are functional places of the skull that you want to think about. So they become really important and useful landmarks in what you've got. They're all functional, right? So you see how simple it is? It could just be made out of blocks of foam so far, right? Let's do a little wider. We could do it by saying this comes out a little bit, you see what I mean? And as it comes up to here, this gets a little wider. So maybe that comes out a little bit. At the bottom of it here, I can bring it down to here in the matrix, and I know that the shadow of that is wider than the shadow of the forward projection, right? You're thinking like an architect entirely, and it's all the blueprints. And then the last thing is here, where looking at it from the front, you would see the teeth, you see the opening for the nose, you see the lunchbox where the teeth are. Just looking at the top, you see the cross section. You'd be able to deduce the place where it meets at the back of that pattern, right? So you just sort of have to think it through in those ways, and then you find the places where you can find the sort of top pattern. You can bring this out a little more. You can add the beauty, the more wave-like shapes or patterns into the direction, right? So you have to study it.